Rain lashed against the window of the cramped apartment where Elias sat, surrounded by the remnants of a life he no longer recognized. Once a celebrated investigative journalist, he had spent the last year in a spiral of disillusionment, chasing leads that went nowhere until the death of his father changed everything. Among the mundane belongings left behind, old watches and stacks of technical journals, Elias had found a single heavy-duty hard drive. It was encrypted with a password only he would know, his mother's birthday. As the drive whirred to life, it revealed a directory titled Project Apex. This was not a collection of family memories. It was a digital vault of the impossible. The first video file played with jarring clarity. It was a sunny afternoon at a neighborhood playground. A construction crane nearby had snapped, sending a massive steel girder plummeting toward a group of children. Suddenly, a young boy stepped forward, his eyes locked on the falling metal. Without lifting a finger, the child seemed to anchor the world. The girder slowed, then stopped entirely, hovering inches above the ground while a trapped dog scampered away to safety. The boy's nose bled profusely as he collapsed, the steel beam finally crashing down once his focus broke. Elias watched it 3 times, his cynical mind searching for digital artifacts, but the physics were undeniably real. He clicked the next file, a grainy CCTV feed from a Tokyo subway station. A woman, distracted, stumbled off the platform just as a high-speed train surged into the station. In a blink, less than a single frame of video, a blur of motion streaked across the screen. The woman was suddenly standing safely back on the tiles, looking bewildered, while the person who had moved her was already far away, a shimmering ghost in the crowd. The flash of Tokyo, his father had labeled it. Then came a thermal camera recording from the brutal wilderness of Norway. A hiker was caught in a lethal blizzard, the temperatures plummeting. Instead of freezing, the man began to glow with intense heat. The snow around him didn't just melt, it evaporated into steam, creating a sanctuary in a frozen hell. Elias felt a cold sweat break across his brow. He had built his career on exposing frauds and charlatans, yet these records felt like a heavy weight of truth. He reached for his father's leather-bound journal, flipping through pages of handwritten notes that confirmed the locations and identities of every subject. His father hadn't just been a scientist. He had been a witness to a new evolution. The notes grew more frantic toward the end, speaking of a shadow group called the Syndicate that was hunting these individuals down to weaponize their gifts. The footage became even more intimate. A hospital security tape showed a nurse walking into a room where a patient lay in a terminal coma. She touched his hand, her face a mask of serene concentration. Within seconds, the man's vitals stabilized, his wasted muscles seemingly knitting back together. In another clip, a man at a bar leaned back to scratch his neck a split second before a heavy ceiling fan fell from the rafters, smashing the table where his head had been. He didn't look surprised. He looked bored, as if he had seen the accident happen in his mind before it ever occurred. Elias realized then that his father wasn't just observing these people. He was acting as their guardian, helping them vanish before the Syndicate could claim them. A sudden movement outside his window caught his eye. A sleek black SUV had pulled to a stop at the curb, its engine idling with a low, predatory hum. 2 men in tactical gear stepped out, their eyes fixed on Elias's window. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Panic flared in Elias's chest as he turned back to the screen. He had just opened a final hidden file labeled Subject 15. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He wasn't just his father's son. He was the final piece of the puzzle, and the hunters were finally at his door. The tires of the black SUV crunched on the gravel outside, echoing like a heartbeat in Elias's ears. He didn't have time to process being Subject 15. He swept the hard drive and his father's journal into a messenger bag, his hands shaking with fear. Slipping through the service entrance, he felt the cold bite of the rain, a stark contrast to the burning adrenaline flooding his veins. He needed someone he could trust. He reached out to Marcus, an old colleague of his who specialized in off-the-grid and secure communications. They met in a dim diner, the air thick with the smell of cheap grease. Marcus looked older, his eyes darting toward the door. Elias began to explain the Apex files and the Syndicate, but Marcus's expression shifted to hollow guilt. Before Elias could finish, the diner's front windows shattered. Marcus had sold Elias's location for a price that wouldn't even cover his debts. The syndicate agents moved with lethal precision, their tactical gear reflecting the neon signs. Elias backed into the kitchen, trapped by men with tranquilizer rifles. Suddenly, the air itself seemed to ripple like heat. An unseen force slammed into the lead agent, throwing him across the room like a rag doll. A tray of silverware levitated for a fraction of a second before being hurled at the second pursuer. Elias felt a hand grab his arm, a hand he could not see, yet felt solid and warm. A shimmering, translucent outline of a young woman flickered into view for a heartbeat before vanishing. This was Sarah, the invisible fugitive. She didn't speak. She only pulled him quickly toward the dark back exit, her presence a phantom guide. They escaped into the labyrinthine alleys, sirens fading as they found refuge in an abandoned and cold subway tunnel. While they waited in the damp darkness, Elias opened the laptop again, desperate to understand the scope of his father's work. He found a clip from a construction site in Dubai. A worker had slipped from a beam 40 stories up. The camera followed his descent, a terrifying plunge. Instead of dying, the man hit the concrete with the force of a meteor, creating a crater, only to stand up and brush the dust off his shoulders, his skin as unyielding as iron. Then came the electric musician, a performer in London who sat on a plastic crate, his fingers dancing across a copper wire. As he hummed, the street lamps for an entire city block flared to life, drawing power from his touch. In the Amazon, a woman stood face to face with a charging jaguar. With a single look, the beast skidded to a halt, its rage dissolving, sitting at her feet to protect her. Most unsettling was the chrono stutter footage showing a head-on collision. Just as the metal began to crumple, the video jittered, skipping backward 5 seconds. The driver, now forewarned, swerved effortlessly, avoiding the death that had been certain. Sarah finally spoke, her voice a fragile whisper. She explained that these gifts were not miracles. They were heavy burdens. Every time she turned invisible, her muscles cramped with agony, and her cells seemed to fray. They were being hunted not for their gifts, but for the serum that lived in their blood. Their conversation was cut short by a high-pitched hum. A syndicate drone hovered at the tunnel entrance. Before Elias could react, a specialized containment net fired, wrapping Sarah in a pulsating electric field. She screamed once before the drone's winch hauled her upward into the night. Alone again and shivering, Elias retreated further into the shadows. He opened the final file on the drive, the one labeled with his own name. It was a video from 30 years ago in a delivery room. The moment he let out his first cry as a newborn, every light bulb in the hospital exploded, and all the heart monitors flatlined in a massive surge. He wasn't just a witness, he was Subject 15. The mountain facility was a tomb of glass and pressurized air, tucked away where the sun never touched the valley floor. Elias moved through the cold shadows of the syndicate's black site, his father's journal acting as a map through a labyrinth of moral decay. Every step felt like a betrayal of his former cynicism, yet his resolve only hardened as he approached the high-security wing. Inside, he witnessed the first miracle. A man sat in a cage of reinforced light, his body flickering like a dying candle. In a sudden, silent puff of cerulean mist, the prisoner vanished from the cell, materializing instantly behind the heavy-set guards. He moved with a ghostly, effortless grace, a teleporter who left only the sharp scent of ozone and the echo of a heartbeat behind as he neutralized the threat before the first alarm could even wail. Further into the bowels of the complex, the facility revealed even deeper perversions of nature. Elias passed a glass-walled cell where an elderly woman sat with her hands bound in heavy titanium alloy. As the tactical teams closed in on her, she didn't flinch or cry out. She simply breathed, and under her gentle touch, the solid metal began to weep. The handcuffs softened, glowing with a dull internal heat until they turned into liquid lead, dripping harmlessly to the floor like gray wax. She was the matter weaver, turning the very tools of her imprisonment into nothing more than useless puddles of sludge. But the syndicate had prepared for a breach of this magnitude. From the end of a long white corridor emerged the enforcer, a man whose presence seemed to suck the very color from the walls. He was an energy vampire, and as he stepped closer, Elias felt a bone-deep, soul-crushing exhaustion settle into his marrow. His legs buckled, his vision swimming as the enforcer drew the bioelectricity directly from his nervous system to fuel his own strength. Just as the darkness began to claim Elias, a nearby captive in a sensory deprivation tank reached out with a desperate mental surge. Suddenly, the solid steel floor of the corridor appeared to vanish, replaced by a terrifying, bottomless pit of swirling cosmic dust and shadow. The guards and the enforcer stumbled back, paralyzed by the illusionist's craft, buying Elias the precious seconds he needed to crawl toward the central command hub. In the heart of the facility, he finally found Sarah. She was strapped to a cold, clinical table, her skin almost transparent under the harsh surgical lights as machines hummed around her. Standing over her was the head of the syndicate, a man whose eyes were as cold as the needles piercing Sarah's veins. He smiled at Elias, not with malice, but with a terrifying sense of ownership. He revealed the final, crushing truth that the journals had only hinted at. Elias's father hadn't just protected these people. He was the primary architect of their evolution. The serum that had sparked these mutations was his father's life's work, and Elias was the masterpiece, the only subject born with the power already woven into his genetic code. As the syndicate leader stepped forward to claim his prize, the dormant force within Elias finally crested like a breaking wave. He didn't feel a surge of rage. He felt a profound, absolute stillness. A wave of crystalline energy rippled outward from his chest, and for the first time, he understood the true meaning of Subject 15. He was the absolute zero. The air in the room didn't just turn cold, it ceased to move entirely. The humming of the computers died. The molecules of the syndicate agents' bodies stalled in mid-motion, and time itself seemed to congeal into a thick, frozen amber. In that perfect, terrifying silence, Elias moved with a godlike calm, unhooking Sarah and walking through the stationary statues of his enemies. He didn't use his newfound power to kill. Instead, he connected his messenger bag to the facility's global uplink. With a single, defiant command, he forced the Project Apex files across every secure network on the planet. The footage of all 15 subjects, the miracles of the healer, the speed of the Tokyo Ghost, and the horrors of the Syndicate's experiments flooded every screen from New York to Nairobi. The secret was out. The era of shadows was over, replaced by a world that now had to reckon with the fact that humanity had changed forever. In the aftermath, as the Syndicate's empire crumbled under international scrutiny and public outrage, Elias and Sarah found themselves standing on a high, wind-swept cliffside. The sun was beginning to rise, casting long, golden fingers across a world that would never be the same again. They were no longer anomalies to be studied or weapons to be forged in the dark. They were the pioneers of a new branch of humanity. As they stood together, watching the morning light hit the crashing waves below, they knew the road ahead would be dangerous and uncertain, but they were no longer alone. They remained the silent watchers of a new dawn, finally free, yet always looking over their shoulders at a world that had only just begun to understand what they truly were.